way down in the lost media rabbit hole, can hold some unholy secrets. The BBC's most embarrassing blooper, Webber's most expensive fan project, and a children's series starring a drunk Ringo Starr. All of them have one thing in common. They all include this chap. In this programme, we're going to take a look at 4 pilot episodes, all relating to the Railway series. And remember, if this sounds like your cup of tea and you want to see more videos just like this one, then subscribing would be sincerely appreciated to join me along the journey across this scenic countryside route. Alright, with the context out of the way, let's get this wagon train a-moving. During early to mid-1953, the BBC had approached the editor of the Railway books at the time, Eric Marriott, to inquire about doing a TV show adaptation of the series. The BBC had already been fairly prolific into adapting many other children's stories to television, such as the Annette Mills character, Colonel Croc, that aired on the BBC's first children's magazine programming block, Whirligig, about the adventures of a retired army vehicle, one of the earliest model series to be made on the BBC. While the world of Colonel Croc was certainly far less grounded than the island of Sodor, it was certainly a proof of concept from the BBC's end that an anthropomorphic train series could be done. So it was finally agreed to at least adapt 2 of the Railway stories. The 2 special episodes would be aired on the programming block Watching with Mother, which had begun airing a year prior in 1952, being shown 3 times a week, where a 15-minute episode of a preschool program would play between 3:45 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Originally conceived and created by Maria Bird and Frida Linkson as a spiritual successor to the radio show Listening with Mother. The name of Watching with Mother wasn't added to the block not until April of '53. This was done to encourage mothers to watch alongside their young tots, as the BBC didn't want to develop a reputation of making television act as a nanny distracting the children for 15 minutes. However, this would be slightly ironic, as most people who grew up with the block Watching with Mother never recall watching it alongside their own mum. Gradually, Watching with Mother, scheduled to be shown 3 times a week on the BBC, was shown from every day onwards from 1955, with 5 separate episodes from different shows being shown each day from Monday to Friday, as an economic way to keep things running for the programming block. No more than 26 programs were produced for each show, which could be shown once a week for a run of 6 months, and then reran once again. So during a time where every BBC programme was filmed virtually as if it was live, the children's block of episodes were recorded on film material, which was very rarely done at the BBC in the 50s, due to the great expense that came with 16/35mm film. At the time, it was the only way to hold onto a copy of a programme long term, as other recording methods, such as being filmed on magnetic tape, were still very much in their infancy by the early 50s. Recording a show would have only ever been done if they felt like that particular show had the potential for wider distribution. So, if a new Watch with Mother programme proved to be quite popular with the audience, then that show could be potentially reran for the block. At the time, it was customary and standard to produce television live, and of course with no ability to edit a transmission. Any mistakes that wound up in front of the camera were part of the final product. In this partially surviving episode of the BBC's rendition of Robin Hood of '53, you can see the rear screen projector flickering in the background, and you can just about hear the crew trying to resolve the issue.
A horse, sir? Nay, I couldn't say there. No horses hereabouts, except them belonging to gentlefolk.
The process of negotiating the rights to the Railway series took within the span of a month. While the BBC did gain the go-ahead, it was under the conditions if the stories remained to be truly faithful to the books, with Reverend Audrey advising the corporation to use 00-gauge Hornby train models to keep an extra level of authenticity to the illustrated characters as seen in the book series. This presented a challenge to the television team, as up until this point all animated characters that appeared on children's television were controlled and brought to life by marionette strings. But now those marionette strings that enable direct control over the puppets would be removed, and would now be instead controlled remotely. And since an inanimate locomotive like a train doesn't offer much in terms of subtle movements, it meant that the crew had to extra meticulously frame the shots and place the characters' markers on point, as the crew couldn't, let's say, reach their hand in to readjust the train's position. While the crew weren't experienced into filming model trains, they fortunately had the model maker P.R. Wickham's, the man responsible for creating the first map of the island of Sodor. He had previously been customizing trains before to look like the characters from the Reverend Audrey books, and would now do the same for the television show. The first story from the books that was selected for broadcast was The Sad Story of Henry. While the BBC still had to follow the story faithfully, they were given some levity to make the programme fit within a 10-minute time slot. So they did this by combining two other railway stories, Edward's Day Out and Edward, Gordon and Henry. The BBC titled the show The Three Railway Engines. For several decades, it's been believed that actress Judy Lang did the narration for the programme, which made sense as she was a series regular for watching from other programmes. But a recent unearthing of a newspaper clipping about the railway series mentions BBC's voice announcer at the time, Namel Middleton, to be the narrator for the show. This clipping is the only mention of her involvement with the programme. So is Middleton the real narrator for the show? Did the newspaper mix up the names of the actresses involved? Or was neither Middleton or Lang truly involved with the programme, and have only been associated via their BBC connections? Since we're talking about a long-lost show now, that's pushing out of reach of living memory, we may never truly know. There were specially made painted backdrops for the 2 episodes that heavily emulated the illustrations of the books. Elements such as superimposed rain as a special effect and foley of real train noises were additionally all prepared for the production. It was by far the most elaborate watching with mother programme made up until that point, as there was a lot of complicated gears at play that had to simultaneously be played in sync to the live feed. Things were certainly not looking promising for the show, as the crew only had a month of pre-production work to put everything together. However, that was far from the worst of it. During the rehearsals, the crew had to do it without the specially made model train setup, as it was still under construction. The crew didn't get a chance to run by the final set not until the final rehearsal, so come the live broadcast, the whole crew had to try and wing it all once again just for the second time around. The episode was aired on the 14th of June of 1953. Reportedly, during the programme, the train movements were rather jerky. This would lead up to what Reverend Audrey would refer to as the elementary mistake. As the model train was moving along the tracks, the connector points didn't connect properly, leading to the train to derail, with no way for the train to resume along the tracks. A stagehand had to come in and manually put the train back on. All the while, it was being filmed and shown live for everyone to see. Allegedly, the narrator apparently somewhat improvised the scene. However, there's no true reference to back this up, and unless the original recording can be retrieved, we may never truly know. This rather major blooper of the episode became sensational news for the tabloids, overshadowing other major stories, such as the trial of John Christie. Not exactly something you want to be drawing comparisons to for your new children's programme. Initially, the following week episode was first delayed and then later cancelled, as the relationship between Reverend Audrey and the BBC deteriorated behind the scenes. Thus, no further series would be made by the BBC. It's not clear if the programme was ever recorded when it was being filmed. While it certainly wasn't uncommon for watching with mother programmes to be recorded, there's certainly no evidence of the episode ever being recorded. And if it was, then there would be little reason for the BBC to hold on to the footage. as given the rather disastrous production, it couldn't be something that could simply be re-aired. To date, there aren't any known surviving copies of the one and only episode of the 3 railway engines. For close to 70 years, there was no visual record of the programme. It wouldn't be until 2021 where a pension newspaper for former BBC employees would show a tantalising image of the model that was used for James. And then at the 3rd Aldry Extravaganza event, the staff displayed an original camera script of the production, and one of the more senior volunteers at the event can actually recall watching the BBC production, giving a first-hand account to the participants of the event. Unless of some sporadic miracle, this is probably the closest we'll ever get to witness the first visual adaptation of the railway books. In 1973, the then publishers of the Railway series, K&M Ward, were approached by 25-year-old Andrew Lloyd Webber, a prolific artist producing numerous of musicals. Within that same year, there was a movie adaptation of one of his shows, Jesus Christ Superstar. With an artist with high prestige, the publishers swiftly arranged a meeting with Webber. He was very interested into doing an animated television series of the railway books, formatting the show into a musical. Webber was a die-hard lover of the book series, and it certainly made him a very desirable individual to adapt the books. As the contract was still being negotiated, Webber and his collaborator Peter Reeves had already begun writing the songs for the project. Webber had enormous plans for the series, as he didn't want to keep the program local in Britain, but bring it across the pond to seek further distribution and funding from America. However, the whole development was almost spoiled and ground to a halt, as Webber was absolutely adamant that he couldn't go forward for an American deal unless if he owned the exclusive copyright over the railway books. Reverend Aldry was very reluctant, as he didn't dare wanted to lose control over the series out of his hands, fearing that the Americans, in his own terms, would vulgarize the property. It put the whole collaboration to a stalemate, but eventually Aldry did allow Webber to go forward with the proposal, being paid an advance £500 for the pilot, which in today's money would be roughly the equivalent of £7,000. Development of the program commenced at Granada TV, with animator Brian Crossgrove overseeing the animation, who had previously done several bits of animation for Rainbow and produced the animated series The Magic Ball. Reportedly, the pilot that they were producing for the show featured 2D cutout characters, not too dissimilar to other British programs such as Ivor the Engine. Webber invested about 10 grand into the pilot, which in early 2020s money would now be about £90,000. By 1976, the pilot was complete enough to be shown in private screenings for interested backers. Unfortunately, the American market that Webber had been aiming for weren't so interested in the program, with some of the investors expressing that they felt like that train locomotives were a bit of a niche interest in America, unlike the UK. Without those American backers, Webber very much abandoned the whole show. But he never lost his passion for the railway books, as in 1977 he formatted the Really Useful Group, and Brian Crossgrove would later go on to format the company, Crossgrove Hall Films, famous for their adaptations of Wind in the Willows, Noddy and the BFG, and countless of other successful cartoon series, like Danger Mouse, Super Ted, Count Duckula, and so many more. Within close to 50 years of the railway pilot being produced, it's never garnered any kind of release and cannot be publicly seen. The only thing we've ever gotten is this behind the scenes image with Brian Crossgrove, which was rediscovered on the website Shutterstock. Underneath Brian we can see the layout of the animation, providing us so far our only tantalizing glimpse of the characters. Fans have tried to reconfigure the image in order to have a better look at the engines. It's not the sharpest, but it's the best that we have right now. Die-hard Thomas fans have tried to redraw the images to give a better idea as to what the Lloyd Webber version of Thomas would have been like, such as this one by DeviantArt user Thomas and Toons. And also, taking a look at the far left of the image, there's an art piece of what looks to be like a top spinner, and it can also be found as a conceptual piece on the wall. Might this be part of the Thomas pilot? Unless if more is unearthed, then we may never truly know. It's not even known if the pilot does still exist. But other Crossgrow Hall projects of the time, like the pilot to Super Ted, does still exist. And just like the Railway episode, it never got aired, so we can only hope. Come 45 years later in 2021, the idea of turning the Railway series into a 2D animated musical series would somewhat come to fruition, as the American toy company Mattel would spawn the program All Engines Go, somewhat loosely based off the Reverend Audrey books. And for the long-term Thomas fans of the series, this brought Audrey's fearful nightmare to the forefront of Americans vulgarizing the property, and the reviews have been underwhelming, let's say. But at the same time, the program did receive mainstream attention of being somewhat progressive, such as casting a real autistic child to play a character with on the spectrum in the show. So credit where credit's due, but not to leave any stones unturned of the franchise's pilots, let's just do a small overview to the proposed pilot of All Engines Go. The concept of rebooting the Thomas series came about in 2019 when a pilot was created having a wildly different style and tone compared to the prior Thomas series. The art style would slightly differ from the final show, with all of the engines' faces having a less geometric shape. Aside from featuring Thomas and Gordon, very little else is known about this Thomas pilot. 8 seconds of the pilot were featured in a Cartoonito promo, and a 40-second storyboard sequence has found its way online. It remains to be seen if anything more will ever be released. Come the late 70s, Britt Allcross was in the midst of doing research on a documentary all about steam engines. It was when that she was trying to reach out to Wilbur Audrey she became infatuated with his books, feeling like that they would make a wonderful television series. After a while of negotiations, she acquired the rights in 1979. She spent a period of 2 years commissioning various test renders to see what medium would best translate for the railway stories, involving such as stop motion and claymation. Dare I ask, is there a whole rabbit hole just purely dedicated to unseen test sequences of the Thomas show? Well, there's very little information to go off, so maybe we should leave that one alone. It wasn't until she met Dave Edmonton, a former veteran of the Jerry Anderson programs of the 60s, that she settled on making the program a model series. Funding was extremely tight. Britt Allcross had to mortgage her own home as a way to spike the budget. The episode that was chosen to act as the pilot was the story of Down the Mind. It was efficient in that they only needed to create 2 railway models, that being Thomas and Gordon. Although Martin Gill really wanted to produce a Henry model, the production took 3 weeks to film between March and April of 1983. The models for the show were not properly tested before the pilot was filmed. They reportedly moved so poorly that they had to be pulled along via fishing wire. Ringo Starr would go on to narrate the first 2 seasons of Thomas. According to Britt Allcross, he narrated the pilot. However, Rick Shikougao doesn't recall Ringo being involved with the pilot. The leaked paperwork does indicate Ringo's involvement, but until the pilot is rediscovered, it can't be truly confirmed. The intro was initially conceptualized to be brought to life via 2D animation, illustrating steam engine puff, but this never came to fruition, and no intro was ever featured with the pilot. And Mike O'Donnell, who would be the show's music composer for the first 7 seasons, doesn't remember doing any music for the pilot episode, so either the program doesn't have any music, or it does, but it's just not by O'Donnell. When the Thomas and Friends program was picked up by ITV, the episode of Down the Mind was completely refilmed, with new updated train models of Thomas and Gordon, and filmed with the clear waters periscope lens system. At the time of this recording, this pilot has yet to have been officially released, but several elements and assets have been leaked of the project. From several behind-the-scenes images, we can see that the Gordon model is very much identical to how he was seen in the final program, barring a different face sculpt for his head, such as the folds on the side of his eyes aren't quite as pronounced, and as well a more defined rim between his nose and mouth, and the cheeks aren't quite as circular in the final design. When the series was launched, the pilot model was initially used as a backup, but then in later seasons it was dismantled and used as set decoration of the remains of a railway engine. Several shots from the pilot were used for the final Down the Mine episode. A prime example is this one right here. As if we have a little inspection, this Thomas model differs from the one from the first season. The lack of certain red paint apps across his side, bits of the yellow framing along his door are missing, and the black metal and white light are missing at his front. And on the vintage Hornby Clockwork train set, it uses a promotional image of the pilot model. We can see some elements such as the red paint tap on his side and the yellow framing have been added, unlike how it was seen in the pilot episode, but he's still missing his white light box. And mysteriously the front is coloured blue rather than grey as seen in the pilot, and Thomas is as well missing his whistle. It could maybe theoretically be a byproduct of airbrushing, which wasn't too uncommon for toy companies to do back in the 80s, as it would sometimes lead to some product imagery not matching the original material. And now that we have a direct clear look at the face, we can see that it's slightly off model when compared to the final show. The smile is a different sculpt, and we can see that those eyebrows are far less angular. Later on the set would be re-released, but with updated packaging to make the Thomas model look far more closer to the show. A slight defect that the pilot models had was that the smoking effect could leak out of their faces. This can be partially viewed in the one shot that we have of Thomas. There are other several shots that are alleged to be from the pilot as well, but let me just stress that at the moment this is just pure speculation from the Thomas community, such as how the carriages will occasionally have black outlines around their eyes, which is off model from how they're seen from the rest of the program, and in a handful of shots the Fat Controller model as well differs from how he's seen from season 1, such as having a dimple on his chin and a stretched M-shaped mouth. And from this behind the scenes image, we can see that that overhead bridge shot that would be later reused for the opening is almost identical but differs from the final episode, such as far more closely emulating an illustration from the book. The script mentions about there being a seaside in the background, but in the behind the scenes image there isn't a seaside to be seen, unless if it's possibly covered up by some of the shrubs in the right hand frame. While the image itself isn't too high res, we do have a sharper, cleaner image of the signal tower that can be seen on the left. Quite a fair bit of production material has leaked of this Thomas pilot in particular, perhaps during part of being related to the most famous incarnation of the Railway series. In December of 2022, the script of the pilot was unofficially uploaded to the internet via a Google Drive link. This is so far the closest we can experience the original version of the episode in some form, but that might not be for long. Over the years there have been several leaked emails from producer Ian McHugh, who has a current stance on the Railway series franchise. He's revealed there have been some plans, although not definitively, that the pilot will be released for Thomas's 80th anniversary, which is in 2025. So let's hope that just around the corner, that at the very least one of these Thomas pilots will be unearthed and released for everyone to enjoy.